Hello and welcome to Founders Amplified, where we spotlight underrepresented founders who are driving innovation and impact across various industries and sectors across the globe. I'm your host, Narayan Kulkarni, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Today's guest is Mayuri Reddy. Mayuri Reddy, who uses she/her pronouns, is a brand storyteller and marketing consultant from Seattle, living in Berlin with ethnic roots in India. For the last 13 years, she's been working in tech, but has strong ties to the arts, as she grew up around music, dance, and events, and started her career in the music industry. Her mission is to create change through connection and breaking cultural boundaries. In addition to her consulting business, she is the founder and host of the Founders Atlas, where she explores business ecosystems around the world through the eyes of visionary founders. She also has a supper club called The Seasoned Path, where each meal is an exploration of a different country or region of the world through the medium of food. So, now that you know a little bit more about Mayuri, let's dive in to the conversation. Welcome to Founders Amplified, Mayuri. It is so great to have you with us. How are you doing today?
I am doing like an 8 out of 10. Despite the fact that it's really rainy in Berlin today, I'm feeling really energized, so I'm really happy to be here. How are you?
I'm also doing great. I'm probably like a 9 to 10 out of 10. It's a wonderful morning talking to a fantastic guest. And yeah, let's get started. So, first, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your journey. So, could you tell me and our audience what led you to become a founder and if there were any moments or experiences that sparked that decision?
Great question. I think the journey to become a founder was something that I have known would probably be a path for me for a very long time. My mom started a business when I was 14, building a school, but even before that, came to the US from India, really built a life of her own. And I really saw the grit and was really amazed by her creativity and the amount of creativity that was allowed for entrepreneurs to have in problem solving. So I was always very curious about the pathway. And then when I was in university, I actually majored in entrepreneurship and marketing and knew that it was something that I at some point would really want to pursue because as many people like to tell me, I really am a really creative thinker and love to solve different types of problems and I'm very curious about different ways that things can be done. And being a founder allows you to wear a lot of hats, which is actually something I love to do. In terms of building my podcast and supper club and all these other ventures I'm building out, I think the journey to getting to this point really stemmed from seeing a gap in what I was looking for and wanting to fill that gap in terms of what I not only was curious about, but also felt like I could make an impact within. And over the last couple of years, I've really been leaning into that.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing. It's really cool to hear how it sounds like your mom, being an entrepreneur, really inspired you, and then your university studies, as well as your unique personality, in addition to finding a gap and wanting to fill that gap, really drove you into the founder path. That's amazing. So next, I'd like to learn a little bit more about dive deeper into like your identity. So, are there any particular facets of your identity or your story that you feel give you a really unique edge as a founder?
Yeah, I mean, one is really the choices that I've made in terms of where I live. So my parents are both from India. They both immigrated to the US before they were even married, got married, and then they moved to New York, then Houston, and then Seattle, which is where I was raised. But I spent a lot of my life going back to India. So I felt already this pull and push of like being parts of two different cultures and seeing how both of those cultures built and worked and being very, very curious about that. And then I eventually just did a lot of traveling. Did an internship when I was in Cape Town, which as opposed to doing study abroad, which allowed me to actually work in South Africa. And then I went to Australia and did a working holiday visa there. So I also worked in Australia. And then it made me really curious about, okay, well, I really want to live abroad. And so when I moved to Berlin 8.5 years ago, I had already at that point seen working cultures in 5 different countries, right? So for me, I had a really great context or curiosity around the diversity of thought that I was able to really, really pinpoint was actually a USP, right? Like the idea that like, oh, in Australia, this is the way they work and this is how they would solve that problem, but in South Africa, this is how they would do it. And I became really great at going into a scenario, whether that was in solving a problem for a client or in working at a corporate like Shopify and seeing the same problem with a lot of different perspectives, not just even from a function perspective of like marketing, product, community, all these things, which is also kind of in my gambit of work, but also from the cultural perspective of like, okay, if we're trying to land a client in this part of the world, it's like they're not going to perceive the same product the same way. You have to sell it differently, etc. So that has actually become a really unique skill set I have. And then that combined with the fact that I am really, really curious about people, I think makes me somebody that people feel comfortable being vulnerable around. And that creates a lot of, I think, psychological safety in the things that I'm building. So I like to think that my skill set or what makes me powerful in what I do is really around that and helping people feel like I'm understand their story and respect it.
Wow, well said. So that really resonates with me because so as you've talked about, as the audience probably knows, so like you're an immigrant. Your parents immigrated to the U.S. You grew up
Yeah.
in the U.S., but also you have a lot of international exposure. Largely, it sounds like through your work as well as through travel, and then that sounds like that shaped a lot of curiosity, see different perspectives, and it's beautiful to see how that maps into the Founders Atlas specifically. So, as the audience knows, for example, my parents similar, they're in certain ways we kind of have parallel journeys. Like my parents are also both from India. I was actually born in India, but very soon after I was born, I moved to the U.S. And so, but I did not grow up in a very large Asian American cities. Like you grew up in places, like your parents moved to like Houston, you grew up in
Yeah.
Seattle, which are very large cities for Asian American
Yeah.
populations. I did not grow up in such cities. And so I firsthand saw, but I grew up in places where there's traditions of activism. I actually studied Asian American studies when I was an undergraduate. I did a lot of Asian American student organizing. So I understood that like international cultures from the perspective of oppression, decolonial perspective, etc. And
And
then
a very
after I
academic
went
lens.
ahead and started working, I then did global mentoring, and so I've mentored and supported people from like 90 plus degrees. So I, in my way, went ahead and like supported people in different countries, and then that informed Founders Amplified, and you can listen to that in episode 0. And also, I, in virtual sense, due to constraints that I had, I was able to travel around the world and connect with different cultures. So just cool to see how two people who have like parents from India, but then like grew up in the U.S. and then like in their own ways went ahead
Yeah.
and got global perspective, and then that informs what they do with their podcast. I just think that's a really cool.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I also think that there's in general like I mean maybe you also have this experience too where people don't really get how diverse India is in itself, right? So there's already actually an understanding of diversity. Like at least that was from my experience of like very early on, even amongst being Indian, right? So every state in
Mhm.
India has its own language and its own cultures and traditions and all this stuff that make it immediately clear, even when you meet other Indians, that they're going to be different from you. And so, even having that perspective and knowing, like, hey, diversity is just a natural way of being, right? Like, we just know that everyone is different and appreciating that, and still being under this, this naming of being an Indian makes you more curious to be like, okay, if my own country that I'm from is this diverse and is um this much perspective difference in again a small country, language difference, etc. Imagine what's happening outside of that. And I think it's really cool to be Indian. I think it's really exciting to be also Indian in a time like this where we're seeing this country go from, at least when I was a kid, being referred to as a third world country to, I think I saw that by 2025 it's going to surpass the US in terms of GDP and everything. So, um, yeah, it's very interesting to see how that has shaped the way that both of us have worked.
Well said. I especially love you talked about diversity with India. So yeah, so like for example, your like the Reddy family name typically associated with Eastern India, states like Bangladesh, for example. My family name is associated with Western India and Maharashtra. So the two different languages, two different cultures, very different realities within. And same thing who are in the U.S. Again, America's not a monolith. There's so much diversity in America as well. And so I also, as a Hindu, I was a Hindu the audience knows, like I was also taught this from a religious perspective. There's like, of course, many different deities. People go ahead and practice religion in different ways. And so, yes, like I love the point you make because I 100% agree and see that from my experience where, yes, just being Indian and seeing the diversity of what that means, but also being American and seeing the diversity of what that means and like really understanding the true kaleidoscope in the world, but also the intersections and the beauty and what that means in terms of the diversity of cultures and seeing that from a powerful perspective of care and wonder. And so I really appreciate that about my love that like, and similar to you, curiosity as well. I also, for my own reasons, became deeper about the world. So I love that you mentioned that point. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now
Yeah.
I'm curious about how it taps into your work. So knows Mayuri is the founder of the Atlas, which is a podcast in the broad world of podcasting, but also it's very unique in the perspective that it takes. So, could you tell us more about what's something about the Founders Atlas and maybe your perspective as a woman podcaster that might make people say, "Oh, I've never thought about that in this way." Podcasting or like your specific approach to the Founders Atlas.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit maybe so context of the podcast itself. So the Founders Atlas is a podcast that explores entrepreneurship around the world. And the idea is to do that through the eyes of different founders. And the idea of the podcast actually came from, I wanted to do a podcast for a long time. So kind of going back into why podcasting is interesting. I think in general, I was curious about podcasting because we're living in an era where we have almost like the greatest accessibility to create our own media that's ever. I mean, we do. It's like the easiest ability to create our own media, right? Like content creation has never been easier. All you need is a phone and you can have a podcast, truly, right? And I was always fascinated by storytelling, and I'm really like working in brand storytelling as well. So podcasting felt like a really amazing way for me to have a creative outlet to find and connect with different people and also trying to elevate stories that I was looking for. So, from this general perspective of podcasting, I think that podcasting is a very powerful content tool that has so much accessibility in terms of cost, can be very low cost. But it can be a really, really powerful way for you not only to build a network, but to build your brand, your own brand, personal brand, build a company brand, and to really learn. So I originally wanted to do a podcast actually similar to what you're doing, which was to interview underrepresented founders. And I had thought about doing it for a while, but I didn't know if that was a perspective that I felt like I could do. I felt like I could do that podcast as well, but it wasn't something, there was something about it where I was like, there's something more that I want to even tackle at a deeper angle. And what ended up happening was I was looking at why do I want to interview underrepresented founders? And the reason why was because I wanted to give more space for underrepresented founders. That was like a big aspect of it, right? Like giving more visibility to founders that normally are not going to get center stage. And then I went to an event where it was a demo day for women entrepreneurs that had done like a investor readiness program. It was an audience of like 100 something people. And the managing director, when introducing the entire evening, asked everyone to think of the first founder that came to mind. And she pointed at one of the people in the audience and asked them what they thought of it. And they said Elon Musk. And then she asked the entire audience how many people thought Elon Musk, and over half the room raised their hand. And I was really stunned by that because, of course, we were in a room of multiple, like so many women founders, VCs, etc. We were about to hear 10 founders who were women of color speak. And even we were not thinking beyond Elon Musk. And so I thought about the underrepresented founders aspect, and then something got me on this tangent of thinking, I don't even actually really know founders outside of a few cities. Like I only know founders in like a few major cities. And when I realized I couldn't name any founders in Bangalore besides my cousins, or couldn't name any founders in any major city besides like four like US cities and a couple European ones, I realized I might actually not know as much as I thought I did. And so the idea of the Founders Atlas was to really uncover and understand the global cultural impact of founders around the world that we're not hearing about at all, and that the types of businesses that they're running that are completely different than what we were exposed to. And as I started uncovering that, I was like, oh, that's a really unique story that I get to tell, that I can speak to because of the experiences I've had living in different cities and now living abroad. And I think that that's a unique story for me, and I want to tell that story. And it's still in a similar way of you of driving, excitement around underrepresented founders. I'm still doing that, but I'm doing it in a way that feels um, a unique story that I get to tell and can speak to with experience, because I can also say like, hey, like I'm Indian. I know my culture impacted the way I look at work. How did it impact yours? And feels very authentic. So it really became this thing where I first wanted to do a podcast, and I had this idea mulling around for a couple of years, and it was a spark of creativity that led me to realize this was the niche within this larger goal of representing underrepresented founders that I really could tell in a unique way.
Well said. I really appreciate what you've shared. A few things that stood out are, first of all, it sounds like really uncovering entrepreneurial ecosystems. That's one thing that I heard, which I think is really powerful and really unique. The other thing that I heard was working cultures in specific cities that are maybe not as highlighted as prominently as major cities like, say, London or New York City in global entrepreneurship contest. A context, but also I heard the element of different businesses, and lastly, I heard the word of depth and a deeper angle. And I mentioned that because, so again, the audience knows if you listen to episode 0, you'll know that like Founders Amplified is much more about underrepresented founders using the word underrepresented very flexibly and the word founder very flexibly. So we also, of course, include nonprofit founders and entrepreneurs as well. We use the word underrepresented, so there's at least one underrepresented identity. So, for example, people might not consider like white female founders underrepresented in certain circles, but in the world of entrepreneurship, white female founders are very much underrepresented. And so we've had
Yeah.
a number of entrepreneurs who are white women as entrepreneurs. All right. And so, but also to the point of your story, right? You have a very unique, wonderful story, which then goes ahead and leads to what you're doing. And I, for example, have a different unique story. So I just love that like you've clearly contextualized this within your story as well, and how it sounds, and I love the word you use, authentic. It is something that clearly you are authoring and you have your unique voice and how you interview, how you engage, the energy that you bring. And I appreciate that you gave us a flavor for that in what you just said. Now, I'm also interested, however, so of course, as you have been interviewing these different founders, as you are creating the atlas metaphorically through your podcast, I'm sure that would have ripple effects into the future. So let's think 5 to 10 years in the future. What are you seeing in the Founders Atlas ecosystem, and or in the lives of the particular founders that you are featuring, and potentially the lives of the customers of those founders that tell you that what you're doing with the Founders Atlas is working?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, let me start with where I see in 5 to 10 years. So my goal is to actually create a true atlas, as you were saying, of what it means to build businesses around the world and turn that into a fund. So, what I would love to do is at a certain point build my own fund where I'm investing in entrepreneurs in different global ecosystems. And because of the context I have into how business is built there, I have a really strong sense of what is going to do really well. Because one of the things that people don't get is, especially with most VC funds, there's a minimum amount of money that needs to be invested. That generally, for a lot of entrepreneurs in different countries like Nigeria or even in India, they don't need as much money as like maybe a founder who's building in Berlin. And so what I would love to do is build a fund that has its own rules about how it invests, that is really focused on, yeah, understanding these different markets and investing in the ones because I have that context. And I would love to create something where whether you are looking to build a company in another part of the world or you're looking to move there and work there, just want to like understand, hey, what would it be like for me to move to Bangalore tomorrow? Or you're looking to understand what is the cultural context you need to understand when building business. So I really like how the culture map gives you these different scales. I would really love the Founders Atlas to become something that is your source for understanding how business around the world can be functioned in a better way. Um, yeah, I see that as like a larger content arm of, I'd love to, I would love the podcast at some point to actually be going and visiting these cities and really meeting with the founders on the ground. I would love for that to create a larger, content arm in terms of writing and publishing and things like that. And really just seeing this like become something that's a lot bigger, where it really feels like people are really excited to invest in businesses around the world, regardless of where they're from. The thing I see for these businesses, I never intentionally looked at any of the businesses that I was interviewing and saying, okay, great, I want social impact businesses. But it's funny enough, every company that I have found and gravitated towards and reached out to, whether they're either a social impact business in some way or their why is so tied to something so much deeper than profit. Like none of them are tied or driven by monetary gain. They're driven by innovation. They're driven by creating something for the greater good of their economy and job creation, etc. And so what I see for these companies is I think that there's going to be a lot of success out of all. Like honestly, I cannot see a single one of the businesses that I spoke to or these founders not finding success. They are all incredible people. They all care about what they're building. And I know for a fact that whether it's the business that they're currently working on or one afterwards, like when people have that deep of a why and truly care about building for the greater good of people, like the people that they're serving, which is they're all living in the countries that they're from, right? All of them have stayed where they are from. So they're working to build in the place that they have, called home. And some of them have even left and come back. I think that shows a lot of power in what their impact will be. And I'm really, really excited to see where they go from there. And then I think for their customers, my hope is that for any founder that is exposed to Founders Atlas or anybody who is any founder who's learning from this podcast and from each other, that it will only ensure that these customers are getting a better experience, right? That their problems are getting solved quicker because there's this knowledge sharing that's happening, right? A founder in Brazil working on a fintech app, obviously the governmental conditions are going to be incredibly different from that in Nigeria, but maybe there's some crossover of strategy that can work for both. Both deal with crazy inflation and, a lot of regulations. There's still some learnings that they can share together. My hope is that for the customers of people who are using this knowledge base to improve their businesses, the customers are actually having a better experience because the businesses they're working with are learning faster and building smarter. Did I answer those
Well said.
questions?
Yeah, well said. I appreciate hearing, for example, like the building an actual atlas, building into a fund. Also, to a point that you made in terms of like building, like how businesses build themselves, but also giving them like cultural context information. That for me, like brings to mind like a venture studio, but also like one of those like cultural etiquette guides, kind of mixed into one. And also to a point that you mentioned, yes, like I admire hearing that like you envision those companies succeeding, but also people going ahead and like developing really meaningful knowledge. So I love that there's the aspects of like connectivity, business success, but also just like general cultural understanding, which again, I love how that ties into your story as well, to the point of authenticity.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, and
I'm sure
I think
you've
the
like through
biggest
the process of building the Founders Atlas, had a lot of different experiences and a lot of different challenges. So this is a two-part question. What's one thing you've learned about being a founder that you wish you had known before you started? And what's one thing you know about global culture that you wish you had known before you'd started?
Okay, so one thing I wish I knew. So I've So the first thing I really founded was I did a summer camp for adults with my friends in 2014. So I've built things before and I've built them with others. And I was really nervous to start something on my own. And I think one thing that really kept me from starting this sooner was a big ol' problem with perfectionism. And so one of the things that I wish I knew sooner was to just start and to not worry about, conditions being perfect because they're never going to be, and realizing that in actuality, learning by doing is just so much more effective because you can read about how to do podcast editing, you can, watch every YouTube video that gives you instructions about how to interview. You're not going to get any better until you actually just start doing it. And I think that that would be one thing is just, I wish I just started sooner. And I'm grateful that I had people around me encourage me to just go for it, even if it wasn't going to be perfect. I think one thing that I was really worried about was because I was just interviewing just wonderful, incredible founders, and I didn't want to not do their story justice because so for many of them, actually for most of them, I was the first podcast they'd ever been on. And I didn't want to tell their story in a poor way. And I was like, oh man, I have to make it perfect. And one of my friends really told me, she was like, just like accept that maybe the first season's not going to be, it's not going to be your best, but you can always re-interview people. You can always bring them back. And I think the second thing you mentioned was, sorry, what was the second question
About
again?
global culture.
What it taught me about global culture. One of the things that I will say is in terms of actually preparing the guests, I think I had a really easy experience, I have to say. I think of all the people that ended up being my podcast guests, there were just obviously some times where people missed the call and then we rescheduled, but that's also expected with working with founders who are really tight deadlines. Um, I think one of the things about global culture that I didn't anticipate until I started doing it was just not realizing how much more humble everyone would be and seeing like sometimes I had to like after speaking to them I almost just was so much more in awe than I think that they even realized. I couldn't even sometimes I would be in the thing and speaking to them and being like, wow, you are so humble about a business that is 20 times cooler than anything I'm seeing anybody in Berlin build, and like trying to get them to almost have a little bit more pride in what they're doing. Not pride, excuse me. I think a lot of them had a lot of pride in what they were doing, but I think one of the things I realized most is in the US, we really talk a lot. There's like a lot of talk, right? You'll meet people who are like, oh yeah, we're building the best thing ever. And these people were not like that. Not a single one of my founders was arrogant. Every single one of them really cared about what they did and were speaking to it in a way that just felt like, oh, we're just doing our work. And I think I realized from global culture that maybe that's one of the reasons why this podcast is so important is people aren't bragging nearly as much as they should. And I think that hopefully this is a way to get more of their accomplishments out in a way that makes people stop and think, hey, why are we investing $2 billion into a grocery delivery company when we could invest, I don't know, this company over here is changing agricultural technology, or this one's changing fintech in Brazil, or this one is changing visual effects in India. Like, why don't we invest in these companies? And so it taught me a lot about how we need to maybe do more encouragement to ensure that these companies are bragging about getting some bragging rights.
Well said. Thanks for sharing. How can people find you and how can they support your work?
So, Founders Atlas, the Founders Atlas, if you podcast, you can find on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just type in the Founders Atlas podcast. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. Please connect with me there as well. I also love to elevate women podcasters, and I'm actually building out a resource to empower women podcasters because I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's actually a really big gender gap in podcasting where despite the fact that women podcasters are growing in numbers, there is a really big disparity in the amount of sponsorship dollars that women end up getting. So it's harder for women to, make an income out of their podcasting work. And so I started something called Pod to Follow Friday. And every Friday, I also highlight one podcast that I'm listening to that's either co-hosted or hosted by a woman, and then I kind of give a little bit of a breakdown. And I'm building on a resource. So I'd also love to connect with other women podcasters. So also reach out to me there. But LinkedIn is usually the best way. Otherwise, yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. We can always chat over email and connect for coffee or something like this if you're in the area. Otherwise, follow the Founders Atlas on the different platforms.
Sounds good. And you can see the links that Mayuri has mentioned in the show notes. You might see some common guests between our different platforms as well. So be on the lookout for that. Now it's time for our signature question. Can you please fill in the blank? I amplify.
Oof. I thought about this before, and then today I really was thinking about it differently. I amplify leaders, I guess. Or like, yeah. I know, I amplify change makers.
Well said. Very profound, very meaningful in the context of you and also who you highlight in the Founders Atlas. And I just want to pause there and conclude and say thank you so much for sharing, Mayuri. It was so amazing to hear about your story, hear about what you're doing at the Founders Atlas, and then hear about the impact that it's making. And I just want to pause and celebrate you for being a fantastic underrepresented founder and an inspiration to underrepresented people everywhere. So I think as I reflect on our conversation, there's so many amazing things that were here, but a few things that really sort of, I love your curiosity, as you've talked about, with direct experience working different cultures, trying to highlight founders. I love how you've gone ahead and realized that in your work. I love how you are bringing your technical skill of marketing with your desire to go ahead and uplift people. I also think there's like amazing symbolic power with like someone who's named Mayuri, which means peacock in many Indian languages, and also Reddy, which is a very prominent political social family traditionally in India. So and with ties in business, for example, someone like that who is doing really meaningful work in marketing, but then taking a global angle, taking an angle and also elevating women leaders. And I just like, again, I just love the work that you're doing, and I applaud how you're really trying to spotlight different parts of the world and build something that's really unique but highly impactful. So thank you so much, Mayuri.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate this. And thank you so much for including me in the community that you're also building with Founders Amplified. I really appreciate being asked to join and also being named alongside the many wonderful founders that you've already had. So really looking forward to continue supporting what you're building as well. And hopefully one day we meet in person soon, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yes, likewise. I look forward to that and to staying in touch. But bye for now, Mayuri.
Bye. Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Founders Amplified. I hope you're feeling as inspired as I am. If you'd like to learn more about our guests and support them, check out the show notes for their details. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating, share it with someone you know, and follow us for more inspiring episodes like this one. If you're a founder who is driving innovation and impact in any industry or sector anywhere in the world and would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Check out the show notes for more information. And finally, remember that you, yes, you, have the power to amplify the voices around you. Whether you're a colleague, family member, friend, funder, mentor, or just another fellow human, your support matters. So I invite you to celebrate and uplift the underrepresented innovators in your life who are driving innovation and impact. Let's create a better future for everyone, together. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep amplifying.